We are live. All right. Well, good morning and welcome to the Board Executive Committee meeting of the East Bay Regional Park District on Wednesday, September 13th. We're beginning today at 11:11. Welcome all. And Madam Clerk, would you call the roll and give us the starting lineup of folks here?
Sure. Director Eccles, Director Coffey,
Present.
Director Waspy.
Here.
Park District Staff Coordinator in this meeting include General Manager Landreth. Today's meeting is held pursuant to the Brown Act. We are providing live audio and video streaming. Members of the public wishing to make a comment can do so via Zoom by submitting an email or leaving a voicemail. This information is on the agenda. If there are no questions about the meeting procedures, we will begin.
All right. Well, our first item today after the roll call, we have approval of the minutes. We don't have minutes from the last meeting in front of us, do we? No. So we generally don't do that. So we'll move right now to public comments. Are there any public comments from anyone on Zoom or in the room? Seeing none, we'll move right now to the informational items. And this is not informational. This is a action item. Will the adoption of the design build policy. Welcome, Ren. It's we can do it last. It's okay. I didn't get the I see it went from informational to action, but I didn't know it was listed as 5. I don't have the new copy. Thank you so much. Yeah, go right ahead. It's not, nothing will change.
Okay. Good afternoon, Executive Committee members. I'm Ren Bates, Chief of Design and Construction. Let me pull up my brief slideshow here. Yeah, thanks. Here we go. So I'm here to give you some background on design build. It is just dealing with this one more time. Here we go. So what we're seeking today is we're seeking that the Executive Committee recommend to take the design build policy to the Board of Directors for adoption. As background, in August of 2022, a little over a year from this today, or a year past, Assembly Bill 2789 was passed and signed by our governor, and in that legislation terminated the sunset for the design build option that was given legislatively to Mid-Penn and Santa Clara Open Space. They were partners in the adoption or in the development of AB 2789. Mid-Penn and Santa Clara Open Valley Open Space, forgive me, sorry, had design build rights. What design build is a alternative procurement method for capital improvement projects. And what it allows is for an agency, well, 2789 extended this right to the Park District to utilize design build, which is a fundamental, it's a different way of design bid build. So in design bid build, typically what we do is we take on the design, we design it all the way through permitting, we take it out to public bid, and then we're required by public bid to take a low bid contractor. The difference between that and design build is that design build provides an entity, and it's typically been municipalities, and it hasn't been extended to special districts until 2017 when Mid-Penn and Santa Clara Valley Open Space had this legislative authority. What it allows is for projects that have sensitive needs and or have a lot. So municipalities typically use design build for delivery of larger buildings like hospitals or libraries, in which what they can allow is it defers some of the risk, and it gets a contractor and a designer to work together collaboratively such that as the design is developing, the contractor can work with the designer and give feedback so that that entity then takes that design or begins and then develops the design, takes it through design development, the final design, and then the contractor and the designer are the same team that we would work with as our main point of contact. It's quite different. It's very different. And what it allows is also based on design bid build is we go out to RFP, we hire consultants or staff develops the construction documents. And so we do that all the way to 100%. We permit that. What we've sometimes happen is then when we go out to bid for low bid contractors, and it's not usually for like the work we do that's specialized when we go out to low bid, McCosker Stream Restoration is an example. So we got Tykert, who did a great job, but they're like a general paving utility contractor. And there are contractors out there that are restoration contractors. And so what a way to do this is that our selection is through best value. So we have to do an RFP process for the whole thing. It's sorry. So here are the benefits: single point of accountability, fewer change orders and claims, because as we've learned in our process is that sometimes when we get low bid contractors, they're low bid contractors and they look for gaps in the plans to make up sort of what they can do. This isn't typical for all contractors. It's not the contractors we work with, but sometimes they do look for change orders, and that's part of it. So what we're hoping that the design build is can reduce that. It can also help us reduce our delivery time. Again, these benefits we haven't seen realized because we haven't utilized design build. But it is a great opportunity for us to try this now that we have legislative authority. So what we're proposing now is a design build policy that basically mirrors the legislation so that we can utilize this as a delivery method. And so I'll get into that a little bit more now in terms of what it is and the major differences. So the major difference is that we have to commit to this procurement method early on. So we can't go through a full design such that we then have a full design and then say we want to do design build. We have to come up with our 30% schematic designs, which you're all familiar with because we've done that for our projects. At that point, what they're called are bridging documents. And so we say, here's the scope, here's our site, here's what we really want to do, and here are the goals of our project. And then we put those together with our 30% bridging documents, put that out for RFP. So then entities will then design and contractors will then look and work together. They have to form a group or an entity, which is then called a design build entity, which is either the designer and the contractor. And they look at the proposal and they say, well, we can do this and we'll figure out how to design it and build it. And then they come back and they give us responses to our proposal or our request for proposals. So what that means is that the district is still responsible and in charge for the project, but the development of that project has sort of been compressed such that the design is happening in conjunction with the entity that's going to build it. And so what we do in design bid build is we give our best effort as to how the contractor is going to deliver that project. In terms of that, what we cannot do is dictate means and methods, or how that contractor is going to read those plans and then provide the material and the equipment to deliver it. What design bid has is that the contractor is working in conjunction with the designer so that they can work together to say, this is the best way to build it. This is how we know we can build it. And then that informs the design, the construction documents that then would be utilized for permitting. So it kind of, and I see some face concerned looks of it's like we're giving up control, but it is a little different. We have never done it here. We've never had the authority to do it here. And so AB 2789 gave legislative authority to the Park District in conjunction with MidPen and Santa Clara to utilize this. MidPen, we've talked with MidPen extensively. They were our partners in getting legislative action happening. So they worked with us and to include the Park District in this legislation. So we've talked with MidPen about this, how they developed it, what benefits they've seen. They used it for a couple of projects for pond restoration that allowed them to then make specifics. And this is how it would apply to the Park District, in that when we have sensitive habitats, what we can do is then we can have, it's an easier thing for the contractor and the designer to work as a team to come up, because we have sensitive habitats, sensitive things. And species concerns. And so this would be a way for us to get into that. So I see, are there questions? I'm not going to wait till the end to answer questions. If you have questions, fire away.
I don't have any. I think it's
Okay,
good.
fair enough. So
Board members have questions?
Quick, my impression, I guess I was wrong. I thought we had used design build since this legislation was enacted.
we have not used design build. The legislation requires that the board take action and adopt a policy before we can utilize it. So in terms of that, we have not had a policy that has been adopted by the board. And so the action in front of you is to recommend that we take the policy to the board for adoption, in which case then we can use it.
Will this then apply to the project across the street?
No. And so that's where we can't utilize it because we've already got plans that are in development beyond where we could utilize design build. So in other words, we're too far along in the process to utilize it as a design build project. And so that is part of the legislation that allows design build. And so we cannot do it across the street. But in moving forward, I know that building across the street is kind of a big project that we won't hopefully repeat too soon. But that said, that project and the big project at Sibley where the stream restoration, these are projects that makes design and construction excited about this opportunity, because these are projects that we could utilize that method in and hopefully bring costs down, bring time down, and deliver projects in a sensitive manner where we can still work with the team, but it gives us an option to work with the method that it's built as well. And so we can have input. We can say, oh, this is a special place we don't want you to touch at all. And it's very clear in the design of that, so that when we go, as opposed to design bid build, we know we mark it in the plans, we put it out to bid, contractor may or may not look at that and bid. And then we come back and we say, we have to make it, there's an extra effort to make sure that they acknowledge and know those concerns. Whereas if this team would be integral to it from the beginning or at 30%, but we haven't utilized it yet. And it's taken us, well, we are where we are today and the policies before you. So that's where we are. So to that end, here's the criteria that we've laid out for utilization of design build. It's got to be over, well, we have to go out to bid for anything over 50K, but we figured 100,000. The thing about it is that these two entities have to come together. So a project that's like $100,000 is not necessarily going to be worth time and effort for two entities to come together for. So this will most likely be utilized only for very large projects, but we need to put a dollar amount in there. We need to make sure for like all of our projects, compliance with CEQA has been verified. So either we have an EIR, we have a mitigated neg deck, or it's exempt. The project's consistent with all of our capital improvement plan that's here at the district. So it's already a project that we vetted and we know we want to do. Funds are available. The project will benefit from specialized design. Like I mentioned, this will give us an opportunity to utilize an entity that is working with us to come up with the most cost-effective and sensitive to all of our requirements, be that cultural, natural resources, and or just the size of a project. For instance, if we built another large facility. Special knowledge of protect species and habitat. Again, this focuses on the ability for us to hire under best value and reviewing the qualifications of a team to see what they've done that's similar. And we can then make our decision based on who is best qualified and who can do the work, as opposed to design bid build, where we put our bids out and we have to take the lowest bid contractor that's responsive and responsible. So it kind of precludes some of that fine tuning of their experience in working in sensitive habitats. And then the last utilization criteria is the project where design features are not achievable through traditional design bid build. I mean, design bid build is what we've had. And so we've done all of our projects that way. I think, as I've noted, larger restoration projects, I think, would be hugely beneficial from design build, because we're always, when we get into some of these that with contractors that aren't necessarily restoration contractors, we have to be diligent in making sure that they are following all of our concerns and or special needs for a project. So the policies in front of you. Yes, Director Eccles. They wouldn't all have to be met, that we want to have them laid out. So in other words, well, I mean, yeah, we would utilize design build for projects that meet pretty much all of these. So it's not procedurally, we still have to figure all of this out. When part of the procedures is that we haven't done this before. So we're going to have to come up with a new legal agreement, I believe, based on how we're going to engage with these contractors contractually. So, or this entity, I shouldn't say contractors because it is designers and contractors. So procedurally, to answer your question, Director Eccles, is that this is our list right now for utilization. The procedures we're working through all of our procedures to figure out how we're going to do this because we haven't done this before. And it is a different method of procurement than we are used to. So to that end, we've again engaged with MidPen to talk with them how they've used it, kind of what they've done developmentally to utilize this procurement method, and we are following suit. So we're developing procedures. We have a draft for that. A lot of that mimics, again, the legislation so that we are complying with the legislation that gives us the right to utilize this procurement method. These are criteria that we came up with based on our projects and how we look at this. And we looked at, so the other alternative method that we use is job order contracting. And so we looked at, we were just looking at one of our policies to sort of come up, not sort of, but to come up with criteria that are consistent with another policy that we have on record. And so these are criteria that have been determined by the district for utilization at the district. So this is just the district determination. It's not legislative by AB 2789, but we are trying. This is, to answer your question, these are district determined and the procedures and policies are basically reflective of the legislation.
Not on the mic. I'm so sorry. So I was just, so for anyone listening online, I had just asked about the criteria and whether these were like the minimum criteria that we needed to use. But I guess part of what was driving my question is you said you would have liked to have used it for the new headquarters, but I wasn't sure that number 6 and number 7 would really be met.
So and no, they wouldn't be, but I think in terms of traditionally design build, as I said earlier, is being utilized for delivery of larger municipal buildings. And so that's kind of the basis of it. I think at the district, so procedurally, we wouldn't, the criteria before you are outlined based on what we would typically use it for. I don't think we're going to be delivering large buildings in the future a lot. So I think we've focused it more on restoration work and sort of,
makes sense.
That
That makes
but
sense.
that would not preclude us from using design build if it becomes that's the best method for delivery in analysis of scoping out a project and determining the best method to deliver. So in other words,
So when you put something out to bid with the design build, then so how does it work in practice? Is it usually the design company that gets together with the contractor and then you said they would together come to you, but
yes.
but I'm just wondering like how that would happen typically.
So I'm not sure how entities come together. I think there are certain entities that work together. So when I say entity, I'm talking of the designer and the contractor. And so what they do have to do is they have to come together and they have to be bound as an entity. So they need to figure out some sort of method by which they are then one entity. So if it's a MOU, if they become an LLC, a temporary LLC, I don't know how that works. I'm not sure how. I'll have to find out more about that, how typically they have done that. But yes, the designer and the contractor, either entity can join up within whichever portion. So it's kind of like if we go out to bid for just our regular projects, the general will look at it and he'll pull a bunch of subs together. In this way, the designer and the contractor, they do have to come together and they have to bind themselves together as one entity such that they work together for us. And that's who our contract will be with, is that one entity. So I'm not sure how the formation of that is once it's out for our request for proposals, but I can find out. I can ask MidPen with what their experiences is. And then I can do some research as to how groups do that.
Yeah, I don't need a lot of detail on that. I was just trying to understand how the process worked generally. So I think I get it.
in my recently retired career work with public hospitals, it usually was a large general contractor who would associate an architect. And so you'd have the general contract in my experience.
Yep.
It was the general contractor who contracted with the agency and brought that package in with that package an architect. So that was mine.
And if I can just add, in my experience, I've seen it go the other way with school districts, for instance. They often start out with a designer and the designer works with a contractor that they're familiar with and that they trust. So I think that there's all kinds of different ways it can happen, but I've definitely seen it more frequently be designer forward because that's kind of what you care about the most in this process.
And I was just going to say, I've done it both ways. So yeah, I think it just kind of depends on the project. Some of these, I would say some of these larger projects might be run by the general contractor.
Yeah.
But it just depends.
Yeah, and we don't know, and we're excited to try it out. So a couple of the projects that to backtrack, I think one of the ones we do want to utilize this on is the Point Panola service yard, because we do have a preliminary, that one we don't have. We need to do site design. We have a prefabricated building that we want to use, which is similar to the Coyote Hills one. And it's an opportunity for us to jump into this kind of straight away if we have the authority to do it, such that then we could utilize it to other projects. I mean, that's one of the ones we're thinking about. Some bridges are another one where typically when we do bridges, we have to have a bridge designer after the fact come in and design the bridge. So it could be a way to do bridges as well. So we are, we're going to have to try it once to figure out how it works. That said, we're doing our research. We're not just jumping into this blind. We are working with sister agencies to figure out how they do it, working towards that. And then this is how we're proceeding. But the first step is to have the board of directors adopt the policy.
So are you?
I'm
Okay,
here to
great.
answer
Sorry.
questions now.
Sorry. Any
No, it's fine.
comments from board members? Any further ones? Well, I would just, I think this sounds fine. It looks like it's easier, but I have a couple of questions. So I'm a little worried about not using the lowest bidder. I think that is a way of control. And I know we keep saying, oh no, these are professional people. And I don't know they're professionals. They have the same issues as everybody else does. Now you're going to make it a little more, I'd like to know the process. And now that we're going to expand it a little more to we're not getting the lowest bidder, we are doing public money, and we are in fact the governance portion of this board, and sort of assign monies. This is just going to be more, and I'm not suggesting it's bad, but it'll be more of we like these people for, I've heard you say they're better at restoration. They're better for some of the specific habitat things we do. What was it? Special knowledge working with sensitive habitats. Well, just off the top, if we do go to this, I'm for it, but to try it out. But is there any way you can report back? I've always wondered how that works. As a person in the Park District who would hire contractors, and obviously low-level contractors that had to be the lowest bidder, it's really hard. But to suggest that they're professional, so we could just, what are the rules?
So
what is the criteria? And is cost ever an issue? And I would love to see it as a board member. I would never meddle in the affairs of the professionals, but I'd be interested in some of these, I follow it when we say, 5 bidders came, we interviewed 3, a panel. I never know who the panel is. So it's very professional people, but I'm wondering, we based it on criteria of how they best suit the needs of the district or some sentence like that. I'm wondering if cost ever comes into it. And I'd truly like to know what the difference in cost was, or do you just pick somebody and then say, no, let's talk about cost?
So to clarify, are you are you talking about consultants, contractors, or a design build entity? Like, so typically we use best value when we select consultants. And so to that end, we come up with an RFP that says, here's the scope for everything we want done. And here's kind of what our outline of schedule is. Here's your deliverables. And so then we receive those proposals. I'm just giving you this so this is for consultants. So when we do that, that then gives us an opportunity to review. And to that end, we then ask for qualifications, who's going to be the main point of contact for the contract, what their experience is. Can you provide us what their basically their resume so that we know what projects they have. So then based on that, we can see if they've done comparable work, what that work was. To that end, also, we've taken on the saying, what is your best guess at the hours? And then give us your cut sheet of salaries or your salary sheet so that we can then back into a number to know what the proposal that we've put out is going to cost from that consultant. So it's not the deciding factor, but we do look at that sometimes when we're making a decision, because if someone says, oh, it's going to take me, just for example, 80 hours, and another time says 60 hours, then we can say, well, what are the tasks that are different? And then that has a cost implication. And so we can say, oh, well, if it can come in at 60, maybe we should look at this group as opposed to this group. And so that's all factored into our decision. So that's part of the consultants. When we go out to bid, we don't have any choice. If it's responsive and responsible, we have to take the low bidder, and that's mandated by law. So when we get to contractors and construction, we don't have a choice. And that's where then we get into, that's kind of how we just have to take the low bidder. And then to that end, we have to resolve issues with them. And so sometimes when we get a low bid after the fact of change orders or whatever may happen, the cost is higher than our second or third lowest bid. So in terms of that, that's just kind of the background as to why design build is an option. So to answer your question, and we haven't done it, but design build would be similar to the consultant. And we would say, provide us the experience that you have, show us what it costs, show us similar jobs that you've done. How long did it take? Give us references for those. And that way we can look at both the consultant and the contractor to say, oh, we know that you've done work like this. Whereas if we go out to design bid build, we've tried pre-quals. It doesn't always work. We have to just take the low bid. And so they might not have experience in restoration work or building a building that we need to have done. But because of law, public contracting code, we are required to work with them. And so that's when we then get into situations from a staff level where it's a lot of management time spent managing a contractor that we didn't have a lot of selection over. So that's in the design build, it's more of that way. So I don't know if that answered your question. I think part of it, and we'll have to suss this out, is that we have done that and asked for hours and dollars for consultants. I'm not sure how that extrapolates to design build yet. So I need to find that out in terms of if we can have that in there or not. So, but if we could, that would be part of our process too, so that we do have a final number to know what it is, that if it fits with our engineer's estimate and all, and so that it's consistent with, as you said, spending public dollars, so that we are truly getting the best value for our money, as opposed to change orders.
That makes sense. So I'm wondering if we did go to this, would this expand or decrease? And I'm assuming it would decrease our pool of folks we can use. Sounds like it would narrow it down.
It would narrow it down. So yes, it would narrow down those entities that would respond. But I'm hoping, and I would suggest that it would narrow that down to entities that are well suited to the work, because it's a lot of work to get even this entity together to put a proposal together. And so they're already way more invested in it than a contractor that wasn't part of the development of plans or anything along those lines. And so that's my speculation.
And you referred to how this is going to have to be a new deal where a designer is going to have to align somehow, whether it's a LLC or whatever you referred to, or form an incorporation to do this with a builder. Or who does that? Does anybody do that now?
So that won't be the onus of the district. That's not on the district. They have to come to us as a combined entity, and however they combine themselves is up to them. So they just have to fit those requirements that we set forth. And so I don't know how they do that, but that is a requirement of the legislation for design build. So and entities do it now. Yes, not for us because we haven't utilized this, but they do. There are companies out there that they do design build. And so, I mean, from my own experience, like just to use McCosker, Hanford is a contractor that does restoration work. And so we've reached out to them and just said, hey, what's your experience with design build? And they have done design build as a restoration contractor. They were one of the bidders that bid the McCosker project. They were not low bidder. And so we went with the low bidder. So I'm not sure how to best answer your question, Director Waspy.
It's not an answer. It's just, I'm throwing them out there. I perceive that if you have these two entities get together, and it sounds perfect, the designer, the person that said, here's what I want you to produce, and then a builder, but they're going to be the same entity now, or I know there won't be the same physical people.
Right.
It'll be the same entity. And then you're going to say, okay, here's the design, go build it. And when it all goes haywire, like we've seen happen a couple of times, they get to sue one another, I guess, instead of us suing them and we suing them and things like that when things go haywire. It's once again, it's not an answer to a question. I just think it's a whole new different thing. I think we limit ourselves a little with this. I think with a little bit of trepidation, I mean, I'll be in favor of this, but I'd surely like to, before it comes to the full board, can't we just call Mid-Penn and say, show us a project that you did, because they're doing them and have been doing them for what, 2 years now? How did it work?
Yeah, we have done that. And so I've highlighted that in the report about how we did talk to Mid-Penn and they did some pond restoration work, which was for sensitive habitat for frogs and I think it was turtles. It's not right in front of me, but it was fairly successful. The entity that they worked with was great. They were able to do work in sensitive habitat. They thought it was rather successful. And so we have reached out to them and talked to them about that. And like I said, we've talked to them about this and trying to develop the policy and making sure that what their hiccups have been. So, but I'll find out more. I'll find out if they've done more. The other thing is that I will caveat, we won't do design build for everything because because as you pointed out, two entities have to come together and they're taking on risks as to, hey, we're doing this together. We don't necessarily, they may or may not do this together. I mean, there are entities, as I understand it, that they do a lot of this work together. I mean, you find somebody that you can work with, and if you can find excellent projects, then I think it works for some folks. That said, we won't do it that way. And to that end, the park staff will manage it the whole process through. It's not like we're just going to cut them loose at 30% and be like, here, go build it for us. So we will have check-ins for the development of that every time, as we do for all of our projects. And we'll make sure we have, as it develops, that we're reviewing those plans, that we're bringing to the stakeholders that are internal. If there are external stakeholders, we'll still pursue that. We'll bring it to the external stakeholders. The design will develop the same way. We'll inform the board as we do now when projects hit milestones. So none of that's going to change. It's just a matter of the contracting, in that we don't then have to split them into two separate phases or entities, but we bring it in as one. And I will say that we won't do it. It's adding another tool to our kit in terms of how we can procure for our capital projects. So we have had design bid build historically. We've expanded that with job order contracting, thanks to the board allowing us to do that. And I think that's proven successful. And that, again, is a different sort of way. It's for restoration and remodeling work, but it is, again, and so now we're looking at, as a resource agency, we're going to have larger restoration work projects. I think there's money out there. As an agency, we want to sort of help steward the land and improve it where we can. And I think design build is a procurement method that will benefit the district in utilizing and having actually just another tool for us to have.
Great, thank you. I agree with you. Any more questions, comments from board members? Any questions or comments from the public? Seeing none, we have the opportunity to move this recommendation to the full board of directors. Do I have a motion to do that? Motion by member Coffey.
So moved.
And a second by member Eccles. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Thank you. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ren.
Okay, our next item is Preserve Lands Education and Outreach Strategy Overview. Ilma, welcome.
Good afternoon, members of the board. On the executive committee, Naomi Laval, principal planner, planning, trails, and GIS. I'm here today to present on the initiative that staff has undertaken regarding education and outreach on preserved lands. So this strategy will be really focused on the East Contra Costa County Habitat conservation plans, preserve lands. But first I'll give a brief overview again of sort of what is the Habitat Conservancy. It is the agency in charge of implementing and achieving the biological goals and objectives of the East Contra Costa County Habitat Conservation Plan and Natural Community Conservation Plan. We are partners with the Conservancy and are the primary landowner for these preserved lands. Hence our desire to really have effective recreation that will meet the goals of the plan itself, which I'll refer to as the HCP. So the HCP provides a streamlined permitting process for impacts to state and federally listed species. Developers pay fees to the Conservancy. Those fees are collected and mitigation is provided for the development projects and for the conservation of species. Plan will ultimately conserve 30,000 acres over 30 years, which is the permit term. That's how long the Conservancy has to issue permits and collect fees. So currently in 2023, the preserve system is at a little over 14,000 acres acquired since 2007. 43 properties in total have been acquired, 42 of which are owned by the Park District. You can see here that we've really expanded the parklands. Everything that's hashed is a property that is subject to the HCP and CCP's guidelines and was acquired in partnership with the Conservancy. The plan itself focuses on 28 covered species. So impacts to these species by different projects can receive permits, state and federal permits for those impacts, and mitigation will be provided through the plan and the Conservancy and Park District's efforts. So you can see there's a wide variety of animals and plants, many of which we are familiar with, and then there are other ones that are a little less known, but just as important. The plan itself is very focused on species and their habitat. So protecting both the species themselves, but also habitat where they are currently found or could be found. The plan speaks to recreation and allows recreation, but there are kind of two tenets that really guide the overall recreation and what is allowed and not allowed in the HCP. So the first one is really that recreation is of secondary importance and must defer to the biological goals and objectives of the HCP. Secondly, recreation will only be allowed where it's compatible with the biological goals. So that means that there might be areas where they're so sensitive that we may choose to not have recreation there. And then there'll be other areas where recreation will be completely appropriate and we'll move forward with passive recreation. These guidelines really speak to how we want to approach the outreach and education. So therefore, staff has really come together to develop a strategy that not only meets the Park District's dual mission, but really also strives to achieve the HCP and CCP's biological goals and objectives. And I think these guidelines really lead, the HCP's guidelines really lead to recreation looking a little bit different on the preserved lands. And there are kind of stricter things that can and cannot happen, like no off-trail use. So people they have to stay on trail. They can't kind of wander over to an area that isn't on a trail. So while those things can be enforceable, I think we have all agreed that education is really the best enforcement tool. Hence why we're focusing on outreach and education as our primary goals of our strategy, as opposed to really thinking about first coming forward with a much stricter enforcement, ticketing, patrolling approach. So the education and outreach strategy, it'll really focus on conveying that conservation is prioritized within the preserve system, creating an integrated branding system. And this is, staff has been working on this the last 6 to 8 months on expanding what this strategy will look like. We're still kind of in the beginning stages. So creating a branding strategy for the preserved lands that are open to recreation, promoting a lot of communication and education strategies that will help influence visitor behavior rather than, kind of focusing on the prohibitions of influence behavior of visitor behavior. So rather than, focusing on ticketing visitors, it's really more focused on influencing positive recreation behavior. Preparing materials to describe the HCP's purpose and success in East Contra Costa County. So really having programming by naturalists and others to really focus on how great it is that this landscape scale conservation is occurring in East Contra Costa County. Developing a recreation monitoring methodology. We actually are required to monitor recreational impacts, which is something that we haven't typically done in the past as focused, I should say. We do monitor recreational impacts, but this is kind of a required reporting requirement back to the resource agencies. So we'll be developing a methodology that'll, really focus on recreation monitoring, and then implementing visitor management activities in response to recreational impacts. So if we have to adjust kind of what people are doing or not doing, if we're seeing an area where people are really going off trail, how can we adaptively manage that and encourage people to stay on trail in particular areas? And that's just one example of how we might need to kind of manage visitor activities. This is just kind of an staff the last 6 to 8 months has really been working on seeing what are we currently doing that sort of addresses these issues. So we have our own signage, our own educational materials, and then also looking at what other agencies are doing. I'm just focusing on kind of the first part, the branding and signage, but we have a lot of other information on educational efforts that other agencies are doing and what has been working and not working for them as well. So this is just kind of an idea of or an example of what kind of our signage look like, and also examples of signage from other agencies. I think we all acknowledge that signage is going to be part of this. It's not going to be the only part of the strategy. There's going to be kind of a higher touch with the public, staff to public, to visitors. We don't want to have too much signage. We don't want to have the signage pollution problem, but at the same time, we are going to have signage. It just may not look like the current signage that we have in our other preserved lands in order to kind of set a different tone on the preserved lands. So some of the key themes really that are guiding a lot of this strategy is, from what we've gathered from other agencies thus far, is that the primary issues related to kind of disruption of the resources is really the unauthorized use. So either going off trail or having your dog off leash or, kind of things that aren't really allowed per the plan. And then social trails. So, construction of trails that were not initially envisioned or permitted. So some of the solutions that we've gathered from others is the proactive high touch engagement, kind of a consistent site presence. So having a lot more of our staff kind of consistently out there engaging with the public. Novel education tools. So there's been kind of a QR code. Another agency is using a QR code to kind of, engage people in a slightly different way. Monitoring trail use, measuring the recreational impacts, and some other agencies have this recreational psychology is focusing on, we know people might want to go off trail to reach a shade location. We might not want that because there's, very sensitive plants or habitat between the trail and the shade location. So other agencies have been able to get permission to build kind of a shade structure right on the trail. So kind of, working with where are people going to want to go? How can we prevent them from going places that we really don't want them to go? And that's, that's just one example. We're providing rest locations. If there's a really great rock somewhere further away, can we provide something else that will encourage them to stay closer to the trail rather than trying to walk out somewhere else to find a rest location? So our next steps in this is staff is going to continue to work on developing some branding guidelines. Our interpretive staff is working on foundation documents. That's their kind of guiding educational documents. And it'll be really focused on the preserved lands and the HCP and NCCP kind of education strategies. we're working with stewardship staff to develop the recreational monitoring methodologies and as well as the adaptive management plan moving forward. So we've brought together a really great team from multiple divisions and departments. So Alex Kaspara from our Planning, Trails, and GIS department is really the lead on this initiative. We have Kevin Damstra and Wyatt Moore from INR and Todd from our environmental graphics. We have representation from operations. Rex is an active member of our team, and Josh Phillips from stewardship, and as well as Eva Rose Levitt from DECO. And we also have representation from public safety. So I think we have a really great multidisciplinary team that will help continue to move this forward. And when we have actual branding guidelines and a finalized strategy, that'll be really coming more back to the board for input. This is really just the introduction of where we're moving and kind of what will be coming next as we move closer to actually having public access on these preserved lands. So thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you. Any questions, comments, board members?
Sure. Well, thank you so much for the report. It's exciting. And I really appreciate actually your last slide with all the people involved, because it just shows the cross section here at the Park District of all of the different people and departments involved. And I think that's really important. I just had one question. You mentioned the developing recreational monitoring methodology a couple of times. And it sounded like you would be mostly measuring the impacts on the trails or the impacts on the land. But I was wondering, are you also measuring what people are doing out there? Like how many people are on the trails? Are they biking? Or I guess they don't bike here, but are they?
You can bike in
Oh, you
certain
can
places.
bike.
Yeah,
Okay. All right. Yeah. Okay. So what is their use of the trails? That sort of thing.
Yeah,
I was wondering if
that
you're
would be part of
studying
it.
that.
We are planning on having at least camera traps or trail counters, at certain locations. So we would be able to collect that data. There is more of an emphasis on, are the species or the habitat themselves being affected by use? Is, a tire tread or foot tread or hoof tread, if it's going off trail, then it's any one of those three are going to impact, species off trail. So it's, is that use on a whole really affecting? But
Right. Yeah. Clearly that would be the most important thing to measure. I was just also curious about the types of uses and how many people are using it too. So if you get that as sort of a, peripheral
and I think
added benefit, that would be interesting to have.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. And I think we will have to monitor, especially in certain areas where we're not allowed to have, certain types of use just because of the habitat that's there. We have to capture whether or not that's being, abided by or not. Yeah.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
Colin?
I think there is a deeper meaning to our referencing recreational restrictions in land acquired in partnership with the Habitat Conservancy. And that is, it's not just physical recreation in terms of hiking or bike riding and such. It gets down to very frustrating limitations. And you all have heard this from me before, and Director Lane frequently. The frustration is with the limitation on amenities, like picnic tables, shade structures, parking. And my particular frustration is because the very area encompassed by the Habitat Conservancy is a large community in Contra Costa that's just teeming with kids out in Brentwood and Oakley and environs. And I've had several occasions to go over the trail design and the trailhead design with planning, for instance, with Vasco Hills and Byron. And the frustration there was we're not providing picnic tables, we're not providing shade structure, we're not providing basic amenities that a Brentwood or Oakley family would want to have available at a trailhead to bring their kids out there. And that just, to me is enormously frustrating. And I've just left it with planners and you in particular and others that, and Brian's got a handful of this, is that we really have to fight with the regulators and push for some more amenities than they want to provide. I've had this conversation frequently with Abby Fateman about the frustration involved. And it reached a point, I think, with some land acquisitions where I've wondered whether it's too restrictive to acquire with Habitat Conservancy funding because of those restrictions. So this is a real dynamic that is part of the Habitat Conservancy. As I stress the frustration with these restrictions, I might note that I am acutely aware that the 30-year plan has another 15 years or so on it. And the 15,000 acres currently that has been acquired, the plan is for another 15,000 acres. It's a vast wilderness between the Concord Hills and Byron and the San Joaquin County and Alameda County lines, a vast wilderness that we're creating out there. For habitat, the habitat corridors that we're creating by accumulating this land is just fabulous. And it's exciting to contemplate that much land being added over the next 15, 20 years, whatever it's going to be. So I'm constantly balancing that. I've even thought of asking you folks to look at an advantage we have as a public agency in acquiring land, which is we don't have to comply with the Subdivision Map Act. And therefore, we can create parcels when we acquire land. And I want to suggest that we be innovative and think about where we might carve out parcels where we don't use Habitat Conservancy funding, as opposed to where we do. So that's my oft repeated thoughts on the Habitat Conservancy. So I don't reject the enormous advantage its existence is to this park agency, to have that partner out there, both in terms of acquiring land and restoring habitat, to have the skills that Abby Fateman brings and her JPA board of directors. It's a huge advantage. And it's one of the many advantages the East Bay Regional Park District brings to the East Bay. So I just need to keep those balls juggling, and we need to keep some innovation involved. And the subject triggered a question, and I'll end with the question is, we're getting I think the Roddy Ranch Golf Course plans back to the board level at some point, and I'm wondering what the status of that was. What I characterized as a design review on some of these questions, like what kind of shade are we going to get? What kind of trees can we plant? The very amenity issues
Yeah, I think
that are concerned.
bailiwick at the moment, and we've handed it off.
Sure. So we are developing plans right now. I think trying to think how best to answer. We'll follow the same procedure. We'll bring it back. We are under. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to best answer. I think
Let's come back with a timeline. 'Cause
Yeah.
I think that there's still
yeah.
some stuff
There's some-
that we're doing.
Yeah,
so.
we are developing plans, and to that end, we will bring them back to the board for review as like for other
Well,
projects.
that's all I was looking for.
Yeah, we'll bring it
It's
back for
in
review.
progress.
And schedule wise, for the GM's comment, we will get that up to date, and we'll give you a schedule of when we will bring it back to the board.
Thank you.
Great. And thank you for your presentation. And I'll express my thanks to the Habitat Conservancy folks and especially Abby for all the benefit that they bring to us. So I share Colin's concern also. I was wondering, is there a formula, or did I dream this up, of, you know, when we come with these large tracts of land out there and the purchase price is such, and then we always get the present at the end that says the Habitat's going to fund 90% of it. Is there any relationship between the 90% and the 10%, in that this may be silly, but I'd been led to believe, or no, I've dreamed this notion up somehow, that 90% would be preserved as the most pristine place in the world, but 10% could be parking lot, picnic table, stuff like that. No, there's no relation. Just it's our investment to get the 90% or whatever. Okay, that's okay.
Yeah, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but I view it almost like when you put one dime of federal dollars into a project, you federalized it. So it kind of, no matter what the percentage is, all those restrictions apply, which is kind of back to Director Coffey's point, for us really to be strategic about, you know, not all money is equal. So we have to, you know, weigh that. Just because the funding might be there, is that the right funding for that acquisition?
All right, thank you. And then, you know, I love your plan. I think the plan is wonderful. And to start out with outreach, I think is very important. And I just wanted to harken back to, I think, can we preemptively do outreach? I'm referring to the meeting we had when we discussed Thurgood Marshall, home of the Port Chicago 50 planning, and many people came here with many ideas. And I think, well, I won't name the exact group, but it was a very prominent dog group said, oh yeah, we want to have dog trails up here. And some cyclists said, we want to have cyclist trails up here, and just didn't get it. Did not get the fact that, no, this is sensitive habitat. Your dog and some of these other things you like to bring along for your farm recreation from the start aren't going to work here. So, you know, preemptively, I think those are real smart people and would understand had they have known. So I think it's a great opportunity to preemptively, before we, or during the process of purchasing these projects and developing them, I think that's where we should hit them first, rather than somebody coming out with a dog in the back of their trunk of their car and saying, whoops, isn't going to happen. But
No,
anyway.
that is, yes, that's one of our
and
goals. To
also,
preemptively
so
educate.
is anything initiating this, or is this just our due diligence? Is the Habitat pressing us? That we do have 14,000 acres. We've been doing this for quite some time. Are they finding that they would like a little more stringent effort on our part?
Part of it is that it's written into the plan that we need to have this recreational monitoring methodology. You know, there's things that are kind of, we need to comply with as we go along. But really, I think, to get to your point about wanting to preemptively educate, we're moving much closer to actually having public access on these lands through the project at Roddy Ranch Golf Course, you know, through other planning efforts. So as we're getting closer to actually having public access, many of us realize that we really need to get ahead of, you know, we don't want people to go out onto the lands and not kind of realize that recreation here might be a little bit different. And how can we preemptively get there? And so exactly, to speak to your point, this is the beginning of that effort. So there probably will be some education efforts, outreach to community groups, even before we open up Roddy Ranch Golf Course, you know, or, you know, any other lands, to really kind of, you know, showcase, like, isn't this great? Let's change our mindset a little bit about how we recreate on these lands, but isn't this wonderful? And we're doing something really great out here, and we all get to experience it. So I think that's, you know, shifting mindsets a little bit, and you know, setting reasonable expectations is really the goal before we have boots on the ground out there.
Sounds great. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Any comments from the public? Seeing no public. In that case, this is an informational item. Thank you very much. It was very informational.
Yeah,
Thank you. Our next item is the update on the San Francisco Bay Trail, including the status of its implementation and upcoming projects. Welcome, Sean.
Good afternoon. I'm Sean Dugan, Trails Program Manager. And oops. There we are. So this item is an informational item, and I geared it towards my role as a board member on the San Francisco Bay Trail board and the steering committee. I represent this park district on that board and engage with other members of the board and other public agency representatives on policy and advice on things. And one of the most interesting parts of this is that it originally was set up under the Association of Bay Area Governments, or ABAG, which I'll refer to it from now on, merged with Metropolitan Transportation Commission in 2017. And so there's some challenges around how the two agencies function, but also the Bay Trail Board itself and the Bay Trail Program, which is a nonprofit, which is now a part of a public agency, which has its nuances. So today I'm going to give you a little background and some context on how that affects the park district, some of the accomplishments that have occurred over the years as far as the Bay Trail program goes, funding challenges, the shifting vision, or what could be referred to as a new vision, but we are all pretty familiar with it. And then the Bay Trail structure discussions that are happening at MTC right now and with the board, and ongoing in future projects and efforts that you should be aware of and see coming in the near future. Again, I am not the expert on MTC or the Bay Trail program over there. We build a lot of projects over here. We're one of the agency partners that I would say is one of the more active or the most active in developing and closing Bay Trail gaps. Proud to say that. But so I am delivering this information to you, and the questions that I can't answer, I'll try to come back if you have any. So the Bay Trail and the nonprofit have accomplished a lot over the last 36 years. There's been 352 miles completed in that time, leaving about 30% left to complete. And the vision is a class 1 separated trail network as where it can be. Some of those miles that have been completed may or may not be separated. And note that the bridges are a big part of the Bay Trail plan and the more expensive items. The low-hanging fruit's already been really completed. So we're left with the more difficult gaps to close. And the question that MTC is asking is how they can move forward from a coordination role to an actual implementation role and support the vision that was originally set up for the Bay Trail. While they have accomplished a lot, MTC is at that crossroads where they have to determine, with the arrangement that I mentioned at the beginning here, with a nonprofit being sort of having staff from a public agency involved with the nonprofit, it's tricky. The board composition right now is not very diverse. So diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives really haven't been brought directly forward to address, other than a few times over the last, at the early 2000s. The 30% that's left, as I mentioned, are some of these are mega, what they're calling mega projects. The Bay Trail Skyway over the west span of the Bay Bridge, for instance, $300 million plus is the estimate on that. And then they're all the way down to the Golden Gate Field section that we at Albany Beach that we actually constructed, which was just under 20. There's operations and maintenance questions that we've been bringing up as an agency for years. Where's the money for that? Can we get some money for that? You know, every agency is asking that. It's not just the park district. Lots of capital opportunities, but when it comes to implementing the operations and maintenance burden that comes with those projects is what sometimes preventing other agencies and jurisdictions from wanting to implement the Bay Trail in their jurisdiction. And so, you know, the mega projects along with operation and maintenance need to be looked at, and it's going to lead towards more funding needed for the Bay Trail program. And so the vision over the years has changed. It did start out as more of a recreational aim, 500-mile trail around the bay. And over time, that's shifted towards a focus on public health and active transportation, as we know. The board's focus and priority has always been on recreation, but it doesn't necessarily jibe with MTC's funding, transportation funding nexus. The goal is really looking at enhancing ridership and usage, gearing the focus on that, and improving connector and spur access. We've experienced this in Oakland, where we're trying to encourage Oakland to build along the waterfront there, but the response is often, well, there are people in Oakland that don't even know that Bay Trail is here, and they have no way of getting there without a car. And so these are issues that the cities are facing, and MTC is recognizing the Bay Trail as a transportation destination and trying to improve the gaps between communities and the Bay Trail, especially focused on all ages and abilities, and enhancing access to equity priority communities, which aligns with the regional active transportation plan and complete streets policies that they have adopted. Incorporating new trends like Class 4 facilities, somewhat separate from traffic, but maybe a little faster to implement. And strengthening public agency coordination and partnerships with community-based organizations. And one of the goals that MTC is really focused on is that decisions moving forward will be data-based and not ad hoc. And so Senate Bill 100 set up the Bay Trail. It didn't come with any funding, and there's been no legislative updates since it was adopted in 1987. But it set up this structure that encouraged the development and relationships with agencies affected by the Bay Trail. There was no mention of a nonprofit in that legislation. And but there were two entities you see on the left and right in this slide that were mandated that actually don't really exist at this point. The advisory committee could technically be the board right now. But anyway, I'll describe that a little bit further. The policy committee was intended to foster public agency environmental organization coordination. And the advisory committee was intended to be comprised of advocates concerned with environmental or ecological protection, or bike groups, or environmental advocates, et cetera. And so what MTC is discussing, and this is not changed, this is not adopted, nothing is solid here. These are discussions that are happening that I'm sharing with you real time. But what they're suggesting is that a reorganization of this in a few different ways. They're recommending that MTC, ABAG, and BATA, or the Bay Area Toll Authority, take on the policy and decision-making responsibilities that are required under SB 100 as a public agency. And suggesting that another advisory and or coordinating body fulfill the legislative mandate of an advisory committee, such as a board or another nonprofit, and not changing the staff or moving, keeping the same staff and goals of the Bay Trail, not taking away from the implementation side of it, but not downsizing, et cetera. And so as far as the policy committee goes, really, these are some of the major partners you see. We're there. BCDC, obviously, the majority of the Bay Trail is proposed within BCDC's jurisdiction, and other public agencies. In this new model, the policy committee aims to strengthen public agency coordination and continue to curate relationships and public partnerships that lead to implementation of the Bay Trail. Funding opportunities, approvals, and accountability for the Bay Trail Work Program can be embedded in this policy body. And coordination roles, public agency moving forward, will be more and more important, and they'll bring more value towards implementing the vision. And then let's see, sorry, I'm looking at my notes here. SB 100 will also be met as ABAG, MTC, BATA will take on the policy committee function mandated in the bill. As far as the advisory committee portion of SB 100, there's a few different tracks that this could take and that they're discussing. So option A is that the nonprofit could be dissolved and then some other advisory structure be formed. I don't know what that would look like. And another options B and C are intended to enhance the fundraising capacity of the nonprofit and provide viable, robust funding opportunities. So essentially, either creating a nonprofit that's independent of MTC and the public entity part with its own executive director and staff, or finding an existing nonprofit that this role could be absorbed into, such as the Bay Area Ridge Trail Council, for instance. And this is my final slide here. These are some of the initiatives that MTC is leading and hiring consultants to do. One of the most pressing one, or I won't say pressing, but the most current one is the Bay Trail Gap Closure Implementation Plan that is being renewed. It was last completed in 2005. What they're doing is they're identifying the gaps, prioritizing them, and costing out the cost to complete the Bay Trail. We're involved on the advisory committee of that, and heavy involvement with community-based organizations in East Oakland and other counties, which is a shift. There's the Bay Trail Strategic Plan that is being updated, and the Regional Trails Data Strategy. I mentioned that they're really looking at making decisions on where funding goes and implementation and policy based on data-driven solutions. The San Francisco Airport Gap Closure Study, that's another mega project. No idea how much that will cost yet, but that's something that they're working on. And then in 2015, they came out with their Bay Trail Design Guidelines, and you may be familiar with that. It was award. It won some awards, but it's starting to look at something that the Park District will need to consider moving forward. Is that they're suggesting that the Bay Trail get wider and wider and have different separations of uses, and we're hearing that from the community. We're trying to close the gaps, but when we're all gone, I think the effort when the Bay Trail is completed will be to then go back to the segments that have been completed and start upgrading. And of course, we have to operate and maintain these from now, and we'll continue to. But as the Bay Trail, matures, I think as a community desires and use numbers go up and change, we're going to see different design guidelines coming forward. They're guidelines. We don't have to follow them if we can't, or it's too cost prohibitive. But so we'll be following all of these at a staff level, but also I'll be involved as a board member, again, on the steering committee and the board, and my alternate is staff, Suzanne Wilson on my staff. So we'll continue to follow this, and that's kind of, I was assuming that was what you wanted to hear about today. That's what I prepared. But I'm happy to take questions or bring any information back with me as we move forward.
Thank you, Sean. Questions, comments?
Thanks so much for the report. I was just curious on the slide where you showed the different options for how they would address the mandate to have an advisory committee. I was just wondering if you could provide some insight into why they think they might need a whole nother nonprofit to be an advisory committee, as opposed to, say, for example, elected officials appointing people or some other way of getting people on an advisory committee.
That's a good question. Those were some of the options being discussed.
Right.
I'm not sure that I would say that nothing's been landed on. So I don't really know the answer as to why they think that would be a good idea, pros and cons to that. But I think in general that there's a conflict of interest with having public agency staff in a program that has a board of like 20 plus people, even people that aren't representing agencies anymore. They really want to sort of like tighten it up a little bit. It's a little loose and I guess I'd say messy right now. I think really the key is that right now the board is not acting in a fundraising capacity, and the agency can't act in that really because of the conflict of interest, because they are the funding agency, right? So I think that's the main reason behind it, is to try to separate those two issues. But then the question becomes, how, does that new entity look? What's the structure, and how do they fundraise?
And would the plan be that there would still be a board, like the board that you currently sit on, would that still exist? And then you'd have the advisory committee, or would you just have one?
I'm guessing when I answer this, that there would, the policy part of it was sort of the agency partnership. And so we would be represented in that partnership, whether or not we would continue to serve or have members, staff serving on the board or steering committee in the new structure is yet to be determined.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I was also wondering, when you talked about possibly needing to widen the trail in the future, I was just like imagining, the work that's yet to be done out there in Point Pinole, which is going to be pretty hard to do with the width that they're working on now. So how would that impact us? Because it seems that, if you had, it doesn't seem like it'd be safe to have the trail narrow in some places and wider than other. I mean, I guess you could do that. Some trails do that. Some roads do that. But anyway, I just wanted to get your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, it's again, they're guidelines. So they're recommendations on what right now they're recommending that like the paved portion be 12 feet and there be a 5-foot shoulder that's consolidated on one side. So if you want to walk your dog or get off the paved part, and that again, that's a recommendation. That is not feasible in a lot of cases. Typically we ask for 20-foot easements and then we put a 10-foot trail with 2-foot shoulders. We are consolidating, for instance, we're getting close to meeting those guidelines at Point Malate, where we are consolidating the shoulder into a 4 or 5 foot, can't remember right now, unpaved portion on the shore side. So you could walk or jog there, with the paved section being 10 feet on the side. But I made some snarky comments to staff when they came out with these guidelines. I said, you're making this harder. You're making this more expensive. And it's more expensive to do that. And a lot of times there just isn't the room. We also have a lot of areas where there's existing bridges that will become the pinch point. So they may be 10 feet wide already. There's no point in widening the trail and then having it narrow. And, so I just think it's something to follow. I wouldn't worry too much about it. We have our standards here that we're going to construct by, and I think it's better. We've always erred on the side of it's better to have a bay trail.
Yes.
And have it meet a
Exactly.
class 1 standard, which is 8 feet wide of pavement with unobstructed shoulders than it is to have the perfect bay trail. But there will be some areas where we're going to get pressure, and we already are getting pressure to widen certain segments of the bay trail. And I think that's where we'll hear it the most.
Yeah, well, I certainly agree. It's important to focus on getting the bay trail in place everywhere. And then yes, maybe if you have to widen it in places, talk about that later. But yeah, I agree. Okay, thanks.
First, the premise for you being here today is being fulfilled, and I'm very much appreciated. And that is that we have folks in management that serve on other agency or agency-related boards. We had Lisa present not too long ago, I believe, and I think I noted Sean's on the Bay Trail Advisory Committee. So we have people that are out there, and we on the board don't know necessarily what they're doing, and they're doing really good work, as Sean exemplifies. So thank you for coming forward with this presentation. I seemingly every year when we have our board priority sessions, I've been finding, as you folks no doubt do, that our priorities change a lot over time because of new opportunities and new circumstances. But there has been, I've looked back, I've had occasion to look back at how I responded to the priority setting sessions that we've had since I was first appointed to this board in 2017. And there's one item in the top of my priority list that's always been there and has been there. And that is that gap closure from Point Wilson to Point Pinole. Because I've always felt since, within a couple of months of being on this board, we had the dedication of that fabulous bridge in shoreline, Pinole Shores. That was very expensive. And it just occurred to me from that point on that we're not going to get the return on investment that we made on that bridge, on the Biorad, that whole history of getting that trail through the Biorad section and on up to Crockett, where I understand the county is pretty close to being able to start the extension from the trail we completed in Rodeo all the way up to Crockett. The Complete Streets project that the county has championed. So that's coming along. But until we close that gap in between Point Wilson and Point Pinole, we're not going to get the full return on investment because people, especially bicyclists, just dead end on that bluff. And I just can only imagine what it's going to do when that gap closure is completed to the volume of use of the San Pablo Bay Trail. It's going to be enormous. It will be a destination biking for bikers throughout California. And there's a synergy with what at least my hometown is doing with their waterfront development and transportation center and an Amtrak station. And people will take Amtrak to Hercules in order to bike between Point Pinole and Crockett. And it's going to feed the waterfront development for business there and even housing. The ability to commute on the Bay Trail when we close that gap to thousands of jobs down around Amazon and Atlas Road, and then the new distribution centers pretty much adjacent to the Dotson Marsh Trail that goes out along the Parkway. There are two huge distribution centers being developed there. So there are going to be thousands of jobs that can use that trail when we complete it. All of which is using this opportunity to continue to stress how important that Bay Trail gap closure is for us. And I started doing a little dance when I saw we were going out to the public for public input now. I've had lots of people fill out that form for what is the intended use you might make of that trail. So we are now gathering public input on that gap closure, Elizabeth, and that was just a big deal to me because I started back in 2017 pushing that, and I'm very pleased to see it coming that far. So it's on topic. I wanted to take that opportunity to talk about it and appreciate again all your work on that MTC body. And thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sean, and thanks for your service on that board. Yeah, I'm excited. Can't wait, but I guess I will wait. I understand the last 200 miles is going to be really tough. So, but you mentioned that 6.1 miles of the trail are currently progressing in the planning and development stages in the Park District. Where is that? Where are those 6.1 miles?
I wish I had a map for you right now. I will do my best to. We're looking at the Oakland waterfront. So near the Flexivan side. Are we still referring to it? No. Tidewater. Yep. Tidewater to High Street. But also working with Oakland to connect to Union Point Park, et cetera, along the waterfront. Obviously Point Malade is in there. And the Point Wilson to Point Pinole Gap. And that is probably Port of Oakland. And I can get you that. I can get you the actual projects, Director,
great.
if you'd like.
Completed 40 miles today. I think that's great. And do we have a percentage of, well, I can know the percentage of 535 miles, but I mean, and percentage of 340 miles. So the Regional Park District's really stepped up to the plate. Are we the leading or you keep score like that?
That's a great question. I think we are at least the top two. And it's mainly because we have two counties.
Right.
But yeah, we've, and I know I won't just say it's because of our size. We have spent a lot of time in Contra Costa County, West Contra Costa County along the shoreline, and a lot of money in that area to implement this Bay Trail so far. And we continue to. So we're active. We're actively completing this vision.
And do we, I'm looking for opportunities. I'm thinking, I know when Janet McBride at the Bridge Trail, anytime she gets a monumental task like the first 100 miles, the second 100 miles, the third 100 miles, and I think she's even
Right.
invited to have an event at these type of special milestones. Do we get involved in that in the Bay Trail? I know we've got 340 miles and 60 more to go. That'll be in 60 years probably. But
Well,
I mean,
I'll make sure that we are getting, if there's an event like that MTC puts on, I'll make sure you're aware of that. We have our ribbon cutting ceremonies. And if you're suggesting we have cake, I think it's a solid yes.
excellent. Well, that's where I was driving.
But to the point too, I think we can also, just encourage as a partner agency that they also do some more promotion of
Yeah.
these openings. So
Okay,
yeah,
that's fair.
even outside of the park.
Well, thank you.
I'll take that back with me. Thanks.
All right. Thank you so much. Are
Thank
there
you.
any comments from the public? Seeing none, this was an informational item, and thank you very much for the information.
Thank you.
All right. Action items. Do we have any action items?
We had one, but you had that
Right.
at the beginning of the meeting.
Any announcements for the good of the order from anyone? Any board member comments? Hearing none. We are adjourned. Thank you very much.